home to yours. Welcome to EMS at Sea Level. I'm here with Mike from SEACOMP Group. Mike, thanks very much for joining us. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with you guys with respect to the whole COVID-19 and how that looks from different sides. But first of all, give me a bit of an introduction to you, maybe how you got to Hong Kong, and a little bit about the group, because you have some diverse elements in there.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, Philip, thanks for having me on the show. SEACOMP is comprised of 3 divisions. So 2 of those are component divisions, and the third, box build manufacturing. So display tech LCDs, the first of the component divisions, you can think of anything from a 1 to 12-inch monochrome or color LCD. Okay. Primarily sold through distributions to the Mauser, DigiKeys of the world. The second is HDP power, and this is small wattage, 36 watt or smaller, globally certified, medical certified in most cases. So kind of higher end certification, more with a global approach, power supply range. That also led us into numerous MFI programs. So being in Southern California around a lot of the design activity. And then the third, that kind of all rolls up into MH manufacturing. So most of the components that we sell go into finished goods that we build at our Dongguan factory. And I would say 50% of those programs were helping with the design. So a design team in Southern California, close to the customer facing. So a lot of guys come to us with an idea and we execute all the way through from sketch to finished product. And the Display Tech acquisition, formerly we were a US America's office for Display Tech. That's what brought me to Hong Kong. And as I was mentioning earlier, coming up on my 8th year anniversary for what was originally slated to be a few years. But we love it here, and I have no desire to go anywhere else. So that's how we got here. Yeah,
no, that's exciting. And when you look at the process of bringing people into that manufacturing element, which is, I guess, a kind of a broad play EMS, are a lot of those coming in as a result of needing display technology or needing other technologies from those components? Do they all feed each other in the ecosystem?
Yeah, typically, I would say people lead their design choices around the LCD. So if you came to me with a new device and you had not chosen the LCD, you know the mechanicals are not done, low-level drivers, you haven't laid out your board. So it's certainly the first item that's chosen in a design. And a lot of times, what people are trying to accomplish and the speed at which they're trying to accomplish them, asking those initial questions leads us to shortcuts. So, hey, we've already done something that's 90% similar. And what you find with most LCD projects is just that. There's 90% overlap. If you took a 7-inch in a refrigerator versus a GPS, 90% the same product, maybe a few extra chips, different sensing. So that leads to a lot of the parts that we build. And actually the same is true with power. So power supplies and lithium batteries playing well together. When we're looking at that from the initial design, we have more of an inclusive overview of what certifications we need to go through, what design considerations. So both lead us to our manufacturing partnerships. And the reality is today, I'd say 50% come from the components and 50% through referrals. So we've been really fortunate to have guys. There's not a lot of guys doing this in Asia, specifically for the size of customer that we entertain.
Yeah, and that's really important in the EMS industry. It's matching the customer and
Sure.
and the supplier size and scale and thinking and that whole process. I wanted to explore a little bit about your experience with respect to the pandemic, because obviously you're predominantly in China, so you've got that manufacturing activity there that would have been hit by supply. Then you would have seen that supply impact happening elsewhere, and then demand disruption in various different markets that you're in. How's that looked to you since, I guess, Chinese New Year?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's certainly never a good time to have a global pandemic.
Absolutely.
The benefit of being a China-based manufacturer was things came through rather quickly, right? So we're in Chinese New Year. We're learning about this in late January. And because of the Chinese New Year loop and iterations of that, our customer base is pretty well experienced to order a bunch of their goods, ship before Chinese New Year. And those weeks after is a trickle back and slowly opening up of things anyway. So in terms of it coinciding with Chinese New Year, that was really a benefit. By the time that we would get back into our normal manufacturing cycle, we hardly skipped a beat from that standpoint. So then it turned to our customers, right? So they were having their slowdowns, which brought on new challenges. But for us, having it all happen early in the year after large shipping worked out well. We had a handful of people in the Hubei province that were kind of the last to make their way back, but we were running at capacity. We were only shut an extra week. And within 3 weeks, we were up and running. So we had the ability, being a medical devices manufacturer, of being one of the first factories to reopen in the area.
Yeah, because you had that essential status. And what were the challenges with reopening? I guess you had to have sufficient PPE for everybody, various different criteria there. How challenging was that?
Honestly, the government was really involved and extremely helpful in terms of getting in and auditing early. And they had a very thorough, detailed list of what they wanted to see happen. Probably the biggest changes were in the cafeteria, with several hundred employees trying to get everyone fed in a safe environment to where you're not traditionally packed in as you would otherwise be. So kind of breaking that up, installing vertical partitions so that if people were sitting across from each other, that was safe. And then a lot of it was focused on where have you been? Do you need to isolate? And then working out the piece that we don't talk a lot about is getting meetings back with our supply chain within China. Is probably the slowest thing to resume. I wouldn't say we're as used to video discussions. Typically, it's, hey, we're working on this thing, come in tomorrow, let's talk about it. And all the precautions around, bringing new people onto the campus and just building a safety net around that. But we had a lot of great guidance. And I think being in Asia, we've been through this before. So people were very quick to know what protocols to put in place. And that's been a huge difference. I can elaborate that on Hong Kong and other parts, but.
No, that's the impression I've had. The whole experience with SARS meant that when people got a call and they were told to put masks on, they put them on pretty much straight away, and there was a lot of control there. You mentioned there your own supply chain. How disruptive was your own supply chain? Was that
it wasn't that disrupted.
No?
Yes. So we made a conscious choice when we purchased the factory to keep the supply chain rather close. So in my prior life, we were designing products in Southern California. We had a team of a dozen people over here going to numerous factories based on what they were best at whatever the solution was. So
Mm-hmm.
when we finally got everyone on one campus to control our own destiny and all be in one place, we said, let's have the supply chain within,
Yeah.
at least an hour radius, because I had personally been on those 3-hour commutes from Shenzhen to Dongguan.
Yeah.
So because we all opened together, there wasn't a huge supply disruption for what we needed.
That's great. That's really
Yeah.
good. And you mentioned medical and special essential status. What kind of products were you producing and are you producing for the kind of fight against the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. So anything from insulin monitoring, that's probably been one of the more successful categories for us during this time period. I don't know the exact science, but there's something related between COVID-19 and diabetes, insulin requirements. So I think if you looked at public reports, there's been an uptick.
Yeah.
We do a lot of post-elective surgery devices. So cold therapy, compression therapy, medical devices, and that obviously has gone the other way, because without the elective surgeries taking place in the US, that slowed down a bit. But anything from electric toothbrushes to electronic pill dispensers, pretty wide breadth of medical product.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. And where do you see demand moving forward? What do you see the impact of this with respect to your future? Because we're hearing sentiment about people wanting to reduce their supply chain dependence on Asia, for example, talking about supply chain diversity. Is that impacting you? What are you seeing at the moment?
It's not, but it's certainly opening the conversation. So let's take, for example, obviously with supply chain, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And when we talk about nearshoring, whether for the customers in the Americas, these different models, there are concerns for categories such as LCDs. So there are not a lot of LCD manufacturers outside of China today. I think I know one in Malaysia that's kind of doing low-end monochrome displays. And then the other, lithium batteries, our cell manufacturer is going to start popping up in Mexico and other places. I haven't seen that yet. So it started a dialogue to say, what other risk mitigation steps can we take? But the reality is either customers start to hold more inventory, or really it's so complex in terms of the weakest link, the LCDs, batteries, et cetera, unless those factories start moving to nearshoring capabilities, we're still in the same situation, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think people sometimes don't look far enough down the supply chain to figure out where those dependencies are. And you've got $4 trillion worth of manufacturing going on in China. You can't just squeeze that into Vietnam or Malaysia or somewhere else, because there just isn't, there isn't the available capacity, and it also just doesn't make sense. So I think that analysis is required.
Yeah, and even being here on the ground in China, I'm part of CEO organizations, specifically Summit Manufacturing, and I've had the opportunity to watch the first movers. So a lot of close friends that have gone to Vietnam, gone to other places that have only otherwise operated in China. You're seeing it in financial reports. It's not easy. People are struggling. A lot of people are coming back. And then just in terms of the sheer magnitude of people available here in China, if the Philippines and Vietnam are only 100 million population, and you look at what we just have in southern China in terms of workers available, I don't see how we can quickly spread that out. And I think when you look at the new trade numbers, you're seeing it's not really slowing down.
Yeah, no, no, I don't see it as doing that. The other thing that you mentioned there was people holding a bit more inventory. And I think we're seeing a little bit of a battle between the old, well, not the old school, but the current just-in-time thinking, and then a little bit more just in case. And we
Yes.
have to balance that. And it's maybe gone too far towards lean, where everybody thought inventory was the enemy, and it really isn't. Strategic inventory makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. If I were sitting at a C-level desk on the OEM side in the US right now, especially given that we still don't know how this is going to evolve. You saw the fizzle in Beijing of new cases.
Yeah.
Really, anything's possible. So if I were sitting at that C-level desk today, I think I would go to the board and say, we're going to take on more inventory. We're going to get it in country or wherever that customer base is. And for this period of the next 6 months, that's just how we're going to play this. Because again, you're only as strong as the weakest link. And everybody's weakest link is probably in one geographical location. So I just haven't found any clever way to mitigate it outside of that.
No, and I think that makes perfect sense. One of the issues when I look back, for example, at the Tech Record 2000, when we had a massive inventory overhang, was a lack of visibility, particularly real-time visibility. We didn't know what we had, we didn't know where stuff was, and we didn't know how to get stuff. I think that's changed, but I think what we're seeing now is an even greater desire to have that real-time visibility. Do you see this as an accelerant for that digital transformation?
I think these things always start dialogue. So unfortunately, what happens a lot is dialogue starts, the world changes. So all of these iterations like a COVID-19, but all these massive challenges that we've gone through, what I've learned is they're very quick. Even if they're 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, they come and go really quickly. I mean, we don't spend a ton of time talking about tariffs anymore. And it was all we talked about, right? But they come and they go. So the good news is they start dialogue. Everybody's having the right conversations. The C-suite has much more time available to sit and work on the business and strategize about where do we want to take this. And you know, things like your show, things like having a ton of conversations around what can the future look like and how can all the stakeholders benefit and what challenges do we need to face together. That's the best outcome I think that we could ask for.
Yeah, and I think that desire to collaborate and communicate has been greater in this crisis than I've seen previously. So that's, that's encouraging. It's a really important time for leadership, and it's a really important time to keep the team together. And I guess you've worked pretty much as a business. You've been quite displaced and dispersed around the world right from the get-go. So has that been a challenge, or has that been something that you've just dropped into and you've been able to keep everybody?
It's probably because of the way that we're structured and having a management team spread out around the world, we're pretty used to working within the constraints of what we have today. So weekly management call involves Europe, San Diego, Hong Kong, China. So we were used to a weekly iteration of going through that process. We're used to engaging our key customers in video conversations. I think the biggest dynamic is during the NPI process, we would typically have teams of people here working with us. And right now, we're spending a lot of our time thinking about how can we do that piece better if we're not going to be able to get together. I mean, for myself, sitting here in Hong Kong, I still can't go to China. Right? So I would typically be there every week. So we're really looking at how does that relate to NPI? Otherwise, as a global operation, I think we're all pretty comfortable having video conversations and
Yeah.
deciding action.
Yeah. Yeah, it is creating that, that intensity of a new product hitting the line. Managing that is gonna be interesting, but actually it'll give you some improved processes, and as you say, it's that catalyst for a dialogue and for a conversation that's hugely valuable. One of the things that everybody's missing is kind of getting out to restaurants and getting to the theatre and doing all those kind of things. I don't know how much of that has reopened in Hong Kong, but what are you doing to stay safe? What's keeping you out of trouble?
Is a great question. Well, I think we've probably been one of the most fortunate locations, specifically because the minute that there was concern of the virus, we're at 99% face mask coverage, even today.
Okay. Wow.
We had a recent death, but otherwise we had 4 deaths the last March 13th. So
wow. Yeah.
very low mortality rate. That left most places open at reduced capacities. Mm-hmm. So if you wanted to, you could, as probably no more than 4 people, you could still go out and get a meal. Then we moved into gyms, cinemas, other things slowly reopening. And now we're pretty much back to normal for the most part.
Yeah.
Youth sports is back to everyone being able to participate. Yeah. I think the big challenge here is going to be, how do we sustain that and open the borders, which we eventually have to do.
Yeah, but, and I think that's the same in many places.
Yeah, some new behaviors, little things. So the gyms were closed here for a long time. And something that came out of it for me was I just started walking home. So you've been to Hong Kong, it's about an hour walk. It is directly uphill. But
that's good for you.
Yeah, it's kind of neat because you experiment, you try new things, you see what works, and you take a break. You spend a lot of time with the family. You take a lot of the time kind of laying out the framework of what's the business look like for the next year.
Yeah. So it's nice to be strategic, isn't it? That's been a benefit, and I think that probably the thing that's given you the most free time is that travel time. That weekly commute to the mainland to visit the factory with that out of the way, and it does give you a bit of time to think more clearly, especially as you walk up that hill for an hour.
There you go.
That's a pretty big march. That's
a good one. And then we took the opportunity. We had been waiting to redesign all of the offices, do construction in China, and we kind of looked and said, well, there's no visitors. We're at reduced capacity. Why don't we just get the construction out of the way now? So we completely went through a renovation the last couple months, just tying up some loose ends that have low-hanging fruit for the last few years.
Yeah, no, I think everybody's doing that. Everybody's house and everybody's business has had a little bit of a tidy up from that available time. So that's a good thing. So last thing before we wrap up, Mike, what advice would you give to your peers, particularly those that have got manufacturing in China and in Asia right now? What would be your advice to them moving forward?
Yeah, the first and foremost is certainly stay safe. We got to think more about the bottom line right now, and how can we all, with large headcounts of teams and employees, how can we do our part to make sure that everyone's staying safe? Have those conversations with your customers. They're more open than ever to help you strategize over that. I would say over communicate. So with my team globally, every Monday I'm doing a video blog to the whole team, because people are concerned. They're watching their friends lose their jobs. They're stuck at home. We tell everyone, number one KPI right now is talk to people, right? So when you can, do it over video, because if you're sitting in your home it's good to talk to as many people as
Yeah.
possible, and then be patient, because as I said, I've been doing this since 2001, and the struggling points that I've been through have been fast in hindsight when you
Yeah.
look back at it, and maybe take notes. So
Yeah.
write down what you're going through now, because you'll always refer back to this when the next
Yeah.
cycle comes through.
Well, there's a great book in there somewhere, isn't there, Mike? That's for sure. When we get to the end of this, it'll be there'll be some interesting stuff to look back upon. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for your candor. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat. And for everybody watching, until next time, we'll see you on the EMS. Thank you.
Thank you so much.